Hello and welcome to this lecture number 2 about theory of science, which is really connected to a concept that we call research philosophy. The objective of this lecture is to explain or trying to understand how and why first, and also how we do research, because there are different ways of doing research and also different ways of why we are doing research. And this lecture is going to overlap a little bit with the lecture that we have on critical accounting, because in critical accounting, I kind of give you the basics of what we're going to discuss now. Now we're going to go into more detail, especially in the positivist and interpretivist paradigms. So there will be a little bit of repetition in here if you were in the lecture that we had before. So why is this important when doing research? Sometimes when we study this, sometimes we feel like it is a lot of things to discuss, like maybe it's a lot of words, a lot of concepts, but in reality, I think that it's very useful. The research philosophy assumptions that we take will guide our research project. It will also be very helpful because in the end, it will help us decide which methods, which sample, which population, which questions we want to address. It will also work kind of like a guide that in the end will facilitate how we conduct research. So it might be seen like a challenge to discuss research philosophy, but in the end, it's very useful. It will answer to many questions that we have, and it will help along the research project and the research process. So to understand research philosophy and itself, I will go back to the first kind of days or first times when humans wanted to do research, and the kind of the earliest ways of doing research focused on just understanding nature. I mean, like we had questions about how nature work, and most of our research efforts, maybe not very formal or maybe a bit informal, were on understanding how things work. Think about, like, for example, mushrooms. How did the first humans learn about mushrooms? Probably different things, but the objective of that was to understand nature. And at that time, the idea was to discover how things work. We kind of believed that, or we interpreted that we were there to discover things, how this and that work, how this and this work. And the approach to do that was basically through trial and error. So it worked well for some time because we discovered a lot of things with trial and error. Maybe some people were hurt or died in that mine with the mushrooms. But that's the way those were the tools that we had. Those were the questions and the objectives that we had for our research projects, and that's how it worked. That's the kind of base of doing research, understanding nature, discovering how things work. And this evolved into more complex research projects that I think we also discussed in the other lecture. It's connected to what we call the scientific method. As we aim to understand, to discover things and to understand nature at a deeper level, we had to be more rigorous in how we conduct our research. So we developed this concept of the scientific method, which focuses on testing ideas, or in other ways, testing hypotheses. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? It's also based in uh, experimentation, documentation, and the idea is to replicate what we have been doing in order to discard ideas or assume that some ideas are correct. This approach has been extremely successful for many years. We have a lot of scientific advances in different areas where this scientific method has been useful. Probably you also even learn it in high school. And this approach is extremely popular in what we call hard sciences or natural sciences, because in there, it's still the same question. We want to understand nature. We want to discover nature. We want it seems like we are here to discover things from natural sciences, from exact sciences. So in there, this idea of discovery is still the dominant paradigm, the dominant um, way of looking at research. And this approach, this paradigm of doing research, we already discussed it last time. It's called positivist paradigm. And to clarify again, don't get confused between positivism and optimism. This is called positivism because it's linked to this idea of testing ideas. Positivism means that I want to positively test something, and that means that I will reject what is not what I want to test. If you remember from statistics, you always had your null and alternative hypothesis, and you always wanted to test that one of the hypotheses was not correct. So that's the same in here. You also want to test ideas by discarding the ones that do not work with your experiments, then assuming positively that the other one works. That's why it's called positivism. Just don't get confused with optimism. So in this, if you remember, in this paradigm is kind of the one of the extremes is positivism, because it assumes that things are to be discovered. It has been used a lot in sciences, as I said before. So this the scientific method has been used a lot, and also it's again, if we were in the natural science school at the university, I will only talk about this. I will only talk about testing hypotheses, doing experiments, doing many experiments, doing different samples, all of this, because in that world, that is how we discover things. That's how we discover if a medicine works or not, through this process of testing and that. But we are not in that school. We are not in the natural science school. We are in the business school, and we are a bit different. And that is because after several years in the social sciences, we realized that positivism has some limitations. We realized that through human interaction and human understanding is more complex than natural sciences, where laws are laws. Even human laws are not like natural laws. Sometimes something applies, there is interpretation, all of these things. So because of that, and when societies became more complex, they realized that maybe in some cases, it's more important to focus on the social aspect rather than the natural aspect of something. So that is something that the positivism cannot really unpack. Social aspects, complexities, and interpretations that are deeper than just bare reactions that we see in nature. And also, sometimes different psychological social aspects are difficult to quantify, which is kind of contradictory to the method of testing. Sometimes it's maybe exactly the same factors, but we feel different. And why that happens, then the positivist paradigm struggles, because then it's the same test, exactly the same factors, and the result is different. Why? Because maybe it's not about testing. And also, in the same sense, it's also a limitation of positivism that interpretations become more important in certain cases. Again, maybe you have a research question or objective that is more about interpreting something rather than discovery, and then is when positivism can be limited a little bit. So I will stop the video here. In the next one, we're going to focus on the other side of these paradigms, the interpretivist paradigm.